utopia, dystopia, structural racism, and Afrofuturism. This presentation is going to go through what is utopia, what is dystopia, where are the origins of utopia, what is the flaws in the design, the historical literary examples of utopia, and how this leads to structural racism, and then where do we go from here? How do we combat this? And we'll take a look at Afrofuturism. So what is utopia? Utopia is an imagined place or state of things in which everything is perfect. What is dystopia? According to the Oxford Dictionary, it's an imagined state or society in which there is great suffering or injustice, typically one that is totalitarian or post-apocalyptic. Utopia and perfection. Utopia is meant to be a perfect place or a perfect society. The term was coined by Sir Thomas More, but it is drawn from multiple sources. We can see this in Plato's The Republic. We can even see this in the Garden of Eden. Plato envisioned a society ruled by philosopher kings. The Garden of Eden is a place in the book of Genesis where humanity begins in the perfect place. The key idea to each of these is the idea of a perfect place, a perfect society. Society is made up of two elements, people and place. Therefore, a utopia is comprised of the perfect people in the perfect place. So what is perfection? And who decides what or who is perfect? This is leading us to the ultimate flaw in the design. When we look at utopia as a genre, we can see multiple examples of this. And this is just a few of them. Herland, The Giver, Brave New World, New Atlantis, Utopia, The Republic. We see this in Gulliver's Travels. Every single one of these utopias are completely different. If these places are meant to be perfect, why are they different? That's because perfect is defined differently in each place and or society. Once perfect is defined, what happens to the imperfect of society? If we're defining perfect, then we're also defining what is not perfect. Here are my arguments. Number one, utopia and dystopia happen simultaneously. Number two, perfect citizens are defined by the powerful. Number three, attempts at utopia have occurred throughout history. And number four, community and inclusion is the antidote to the utopian state. Who benefits from utopia? The perfect people, utopians. How are they defined? What makes a utopian, and therefore what makes a non-utopian, a non-utopian? What happens to the non-utopians? I would say they are exposed to what I call the three E's. Expulsion, or like mass deportation. Exploitation, like enslavement. Or execution, basically genocide. For the exploited, those who remain, there are two societies that exist. This is where we see the creation of second-class citizens. Coming at this from critical discourse theory, in utopian fiction, the description of these perfect societies are often told by a member of the elite class. So that means that the voices of the lower classes are often not heard. This would be the enslaved of Utopia, the epsilons of Brave New World, those without memories in The Giver. Those are the people we don't hear from. Who do we hear from? We hear from the elites. And because we only ever hear from them, these societies always seem perfect by their definition. Has utopia been attempted in history? There are several potential examples. We can look at the American experiment, or a city upon a hill. Condit Leucides, Wilkerson, Fagan, Mills, Omea Wynant, Lipschitz, all of them look at the two different Americas from different angles. All of this, I think, comes from utopian thinking. We can also see this in some of the worst examples we see in history as well. Although I would also argue that the American experiment is an example of the worst as well. You know, Stalin's Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, apartheid South Africa, all of these have rhetoric in their thought processes that are utopian. So I think utopia is ultimately the main core issue. What has utopian thinking led to in society? Inequality and injustice are hallmarks of society built on the pursuit of perfection. Uh, the illusion of perfection must be maintained through things like um, propaganda and instilled beliefs that people are raised with. Anybody who's undesirable are subjected to the three E's. Ultimately, these things lead to injustice, inequality, and eventually collapse because we're not just exploiting the people, we're exploiting the place as well. If achieving a perfect society shouldn't be the goal, what is the alternative? I would argue that Afrofuturism offers us something to look forward to. Afrofuturism is a movement of art, literature, or science or speculative fiction that explores the intersection between science and technology and Black history and culture. Features of Afrofuturism include community, inclusion, feminism, liberation, technology, belief systems, all of these contributing to the collective whole. The most famous example of Afrofuturism would be Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. The book ultimately ends with the establishment of the Earthseed community in California. At the same time, Afrofuturism includes art and music, including that of Janelle Monáe, Earth, Wind, and Fire. We also see this in television with like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, among many others. Ultimately, it's the idea of looking at the future in a way that includes those in the African diaspora or anybody that would be deemed imperfect. The argument for Afrofuturism, speculative fiction in Afrofuturism imagines a world and a future that is inclusive and liberated. In Parable of the Sower, the world is collapsing due to climate change, and at the same time, America is experiencing the conclusion of utopia dystopia. The main protagonist, after her community is destroyed, establishes a traveling community, all centered around her religion, Earthseed. Her pursuit of community, a community made up of people of all kinds, ends up being far healthier than the rest of the world. Butler is offering community as the alternative to utopian ideas. Why would an art or literature movement be the answer to utopian thinking? Art and literature inspires overall thought. Utopian thinking started with stories about an imagined past and an imagined future. If the idea of a perfect society started with stories, then shouldn't the alternative? Octavia Butler imagined a world where a young woman started a community to save the dystopian world she lived in. Community was her answer, an inclusive community. Octavia Butler is asking the question, what would it look like to combat dystopia with community? This is the power of speculative fiction. Today, community and collective liberation are buzzwords on social media. The idea has taken root. At the end of the day, the discussion needs to focus on the wrongs of utopia rather than utopia's impossibility. Concluding this presentation, there are further elements that need to be included, that can be included in this thesis, but may need to go on to a later paper. The connection between utopian thinking and settler colonialism, the dystopian genre and speculative warnings, who experiences dystopia throughout history, exploring Afrofuturism and how that can translate to the real world, rhetoric of utopian thinking versus Afrofuturist thinking. We can talk about this more when we meet next week. Thank you very much.